The boardroom was on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long glass table, 12 people in expensive chairs, the kind of room that had always felt like it belonged to someone else. I had been in that room exactly once before, 3 years earlier, when I was introduced as a new hire. I had sat near the door then, quiet, careful, grateful just to be included. This time, I sat at the center of the table. And across from me, my boss, Richard Calloway, sat very still and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The slide on the screen behind me contained his own words, his own emails, his own signature on a document he had told the entire company didn't exist. 12 board members looked at the screen, then at Richard, then back at the screen. The CFO cleared his throat. The legal counsel opened her notebook, and Richard, the man who had spent 3 years taking credit for my work, my ideas, my strategies, looked at the table in front of him like he was hoping it might open up and swallow him before anyone asked him to explain himself. He had called me ambitious once, in a tone that made it sound like a character flaw. He had told the promotion committee I lacked the experience for senior leadership. He had smiled at me in the hallway the morning after I found out I hadn't gotten the role and said, "These things take time, Elena. You'll get your moment." I smiled back, because I already knew what was on that slide, and his moment had just arrived. My name is Elena, and I had been underestimated in professional settings for so long that I had almost started to mistake it for a personality trait. I grew up in a household where hard work was the language of love. My father worked double shifts. My mother cleaned houses on weekends. Neither of them had college degrees. Both of them believed completely and without reservation that their daughter would be the first person in our family to build something different. I took that seriously. I graduated top of my class. I worked 2 jobs through university. I wrote my dissertation on organizational strategy while interning 60 hours a week at a consulting firm that paid me in experience rather than salary. When I finally got my first real position, junior analyst at Meridian Capital, I celebrated alone in my apartment with cheap wine and a phone call to my mother that made her cry. I was not the loudest person in any room I entered. I was not the most socially comfortable. I did not network with ease or perform confidence in the way some of my colleagues seemed to manage effortlessly. What I did was work. Carefully, consistently, with the kind of focus that comes from knowing exactly how much it cost to get to the table. Richard Calloway was my direct manager from my second year at Meridian. He was polished in the way that some men in corporate environments are polished. Smooth surfaces, no visible edges, always the right thing to say to the right person at the right moment. He was good at his job, but he was better at being seen doing his job. I noticed early that he had a habit of presenting other people's work as collaborative. In meetings, he used the word "we" liberally. In emails to leadership, the "we" quietly became "I." I made a note of it, and then I kept making notes. For 3 years. But I was about to find out how wrong they all were. The promotion had been discussed openly within our department for almost a year. Senior Strategy Director, a newly created role reporting directly to the CEO. It would mean leading a team of 12, a salary increase of $62,000, and a seat at the leadership table. I had been told informally by 2 different people in HR that I was the frontrunner. My performance reviews for 3 consecutive years were the highest in the department. I had led the restructuring of the client portfolio that generated an additional $4.8 million in retained revenue. I had built a risk assessment framework that had since been adopted company-wide. I applied formally in March. I prepared for 4 weeks. The interview panel included Richard. 6 weeks later, the announcement came. The role had been given to someone named David Park, who had joined the company 14 months earlier, had no experience in strategy, and whose primary qualification appeared to be that he played golf with Richard on weekends. I sat in the bathroom for 20 minutes after I read the email, not crying, just sitting. When I came out, Richard was in the hallway. He smiled. He said, "These things take time, Elena. You'll get your moment." I smiled back and said nothing. That evening, I began going through every document, every presentation, every strategy report I had written or contributed to over the previous 3 years. I built a file. Dates, titles, email chains, tracked changes in shared documents showing authorship. 47 documents in total. Then I reached out to a former colleague, James, who had left Meridian 8 months earlier and who had been in several key meetings with Richard. James was happy to talk. He had been waiting, he said, for someone to ask. What James told me about a specific board presentation in October, a presentation that had won Richard a performance bonus of $80,000, made everything very clear. That presentation had been mine, start to finish. Richard had presented it as his own work to the full board, without my name appearing anywhere. And there was a paper trail. James had kept copies, not out of malice, out of habit. He was the kind of person who archived everything, which is a quality that tends to look like paranoia until the moment it looks like genius. He sent me a folder, 43 files. I opened them at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening with a glass of water and a very steady feeling that I recognized as the specific calm that comes just before everything changes. The October presentation was there. The original file, authored by me, last modified by me, with a creation date 3 weeks before Richard had presented it. His version, the one submitted to the board, had been stripped of metadata, but the original hadn't, and the original existed on a shared company server that Richard had apparently forgotten I still had access to. There were also emails, internal ones between Richard and David, dating back to January, 4 months before my formal application for the promotion. In those emails, Richard discussed the role, discussed the timeline, and said clearly in writing that he intended to recommend David regardless of the formal process. "The committee will follow my lead," he had written. "Elena is good, but she doesn't fit the profile we're building toward." I read that sentence 4 times. I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder and more useful than rage. I felt clarity. I contacted Meridian's general counsel directly, not HR, general counsel. I sent her a summary email at 9 in the morning with the key documents attached and a request for a confidential meeting before end of week. She responded within 2 hours. Her response was 3 words. "I'll call you." She called. We spoke for 40 minutes. At the end of the call, she said, "I'm going to need you to bring everything you have to the board meeting on Thursday." I said I would. And on Thursday morning, I walked into that 14th floor boardroom for the second time in my career, and this time, I did not sit near the door. The board meeting had been scheduled as a routine quarterly review. Richard didn't know the agenda had been amended. He found out when the general counsel opened by saying there was a preliminary matter to address before the standard items. Richard looked at his phone, then at the door, then at me. I did not look away. The general counsel presented the findings calmly and without editorializing. The documented evidence of intellectual property misattribution, the original authorship of the October presentation, the email chain between Richard and David discussing the promotion outcome before the formal process had concluded. She read the email aloud, the one that said, "Elena's good, but she doesn't fit the profile we're building toward." The room was completely silent. One board member leaned forward. "Richard, can you walk us through your understanding of the authorship question regarding the October presentation?" Richard opened his mouth. What came out was not an explanation. It was the beginning of several different sentences that didn't finish, words that started and redirected and started again, the polished surface cracking in real time in front of 12 people who had trusted him. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Every document on that screen said everything with far more precision than I ever could have managed in that moment. The chairman looked at Richard for a long moment, then he looked at me. "Ms. Elena," he said, Thank you for bringing this forward. Richard looked at me then. Really looked at me, possibly for the first time since I had worked for him. I looked back, calm, direct, completely unafraid. These things take time, I said quietly. The room understood exactly what I meant. Richard resigned before the end of that week. The company's statement cited a mutual decision to part ways. The board knew what it meant. The senior strategy director role was reopened. I was asked, not invited to reapply, but asked directly by the CEO whether I would consider stepping into the position while a formal process was conducted. I said yes. David Park was quietly moved to a different department. We have not spoken since. I received a formal acknowledgement from the company regarding the October presentation and the revenue it had generated. A retroactive bonus was included. It was not nothing. I called my mother the evening after the board meeting. She asked how my day was. I told her something good had happened at work. She asked what? I said, someone finally read the room. She laughed. She didn't fully understand, but she laughed, and that was enough. What I have now, my name on the work I built, my seat at the table I earned, my own confidence in the knowledge that I was right to keep going when it would have been easier to stop. No resignation letter, no reorg, no rewritten history can touch that. I worked for it, honestly, and it is completely mine. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from working in a room where your contributions are absorbed by someone else and presented back to you as evidence of their success. It is quieter than other kinds of unfairness. It leaves no visible marks, but it leaves a paper trail. If you have ever been the person doing the work while someone else accepted the credit, if you have ever been told you lack the experience for a room you were already building, this story was for you. Drop a heart if you believe that documentation is the quietest form of power. Comment below. Has someone ever taken credit for your work? Tell me. I read every single one. Subscribe, because every week we tell the stories of women who were overlooked in rooms they were holding up. And every week we show what happened when the paper trail finally spoke. Because the most dangerous employee in any building is the quiet one who kept every email.